In this video, we're learning how to solve quadratic equations by factoring. And if we take a look at example 1, we have x squared plus 7x plus 12 is equal to 0. So when we're solving quadratic equations, we always want to get everything to one side. And in all these examples, we have every term on one side and we have 0 on the other side. So we're just going to start by factoring. So remember to factor a quadratic where the leading coefficient is 1. So in this case, we just have a 1 in front of this x squared. We just need to find two numbers that multiply to our c term of 12 that add to our b term of 7. So I'll write 12 right here, and we need to find two factors of 12 that add to 7. So our factors are going to be 3 and 4. And what we're going to do is now we're going to factor this as x plus 3 times x plus 4, and that's equal to 0. And now we have to understand how we can make either of these binomials equal to 0. So what I want to show you guys first is if we have something like this, a times b is equal to 0, in order for this to be true, a has to equal 0 or b has to equal 0. Or both can equal 0. But we only need one of those to equal 0 because when we multiply it by the other variable, regardless of what the other variable is, it'll turn out as 0. So we're going to use that concept to solve these types of problems. So what we want to do is take each of our factors, because they're being multiplied together, they're factors, so x plus 3 and x plus 4, and we're going to set them both equal to 0 and solve them separately. As long as one of those factors is equal to 0, our entire equation will be equal to 0. So if we solve this left equation by subtracting 3 from both sides, we get one solution as x is equal to negative 3. And if we solve our other equation, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides, and we get another solution as x is equal to negative 4. So we get two solutions. We get that x can equal negative 3, or x can equal negative 4. Let's take a look at the second example, which is 3x squared minus 24x minus 27 equals 0. So when you're factoring, you always want to check to see if you can pull out any common factor between your terms before we go into breaking this into binomials. So you may notice that 3, negative 24, and negative 27 are all divisible by 3. So we're going to start by taking a 3 out. We're going to be left with x squared minus 8x minus 9 is equal to 0. And now we can just get rid of this 3 by dividing both sides of our equation by 3. So I'm going to divide both sides of my equation by 3. On the left side, 3 over 3 is 1, so I'm just left with x squared minus 8x minus 9. And on the right side, 0 divided by 3 is just 0. So now I'm going to factor this similarly to how I factored example 1. So I need two numbers that multiply to negative 9 that add to negative 8. And if you take a second and think about it, we should get negative 9 and positive 1. So now I'm going to rewrite my quadratic as x minus 9 times x plus 1, and we know this is equal to 0. And now remember, in order for our equation to equal 0, either of these factors can equal 0. So I'm going to take each factor, set it equal to 0, and solve each equation separately. On the left, we're going to add 9 to both sides to get one solution of x equals 9. And on the right, we're going to subtract 1 from both sides to get our other solution of x equals negative 1. So we get that x can equal positive 9 or negative 1. Let's go through some more examples. So taking a look at example 3, we have 15x squared plus 7x minus 2 is equal to 0. And we don't have any common factor between our three terms, so we can't start by pulling anything out. So I'm going to use what's called the x method to factor this one. And if you guys haven't already done so, I encourage you to watch our video teaching how to factor trinomials like this, where your a value is greater than 1, because the method is different than when we factor trinomials where a is equal to 1, and it's a little bit more challenging. So if you've already watched that video, what you want to remember is that up top, you want to put a times c. So our a term is 15, our c term is negative 2. If we multiply that together, we get negative 30. Down here, we want to put our b term, which is positive 7. And now we need to find two numbers that multiply to negative 30 that add to positive 7. So take a second and think about that. And if you figured it out, you should have got that the two numbers are positive 10 and negative 3 because those multiply to negative 30 but add to positive 7. And now this is a really important part of this method. So what we want to do next is split our middle term. We're not going to be able to make our binomials just yet. So instead of a positive 7x, we want to take these two numbers in this x over here. We're going to split our middle term into two terms with those coefficients. So instead of 7x, we're going to have plus 10x and minus 3x. And then we're going to keep the minus 2 the same. And now what we want to do is factor the left two terms separately and factor the right two terms separately. So to factor the left two terms, we're going to think of what we can pull out of both of them, and we can take out a 5x. If we pull a 5x out of a 15x squared, we're left with a 3x. If we pull a 5x out of a 10x, we're left with a plus 2. And now when we're factoring the negative 3x minus 2, we can't take anything out, so we're just going to take out a negative 1. So we always want to take the sign of the leftmost term. So we take out a negative 1, and we're going to be left with a positive 3x plus 2, because we took the negative out of both of those terms. And then finally, what we want to do is now make our two binomials. And I'm sorry, I should have had that this is equal to 0 the entire time. We should carry that through. So what we're going to do is take the set of parentheses that repeats, which is 3x plus 2. That's our first set of parentheses. And then for our second binomial, we're going to take these two numbers on the outside, the 5x, or the two terms, the 5x and the minus 1. So we're going to get 5x minus 1 is equal to 0. And now we're going to solve this the same way that we solved the other two problems, where we're going to set each binomial equal to 0 and solve them separately. So on the left, we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. So we get 3x equals negative 2. We're going to divide both sides by 3 to get one solution, as x is equal to negative 2 over 3. On the right, we're going to add 1 to both sides. So we get 5x is equal to 1. Divide both sides by 5 to get our second solution, as x is equal to positive 1/5. So we get x is equal to negative 2/3, or x is equal to 1/5. Taking a look at example 4, we only have two terms. We have 9x squared minus 16 is equal to 0. So what we have to remember is that this is called the difference of two squares. And the way you can tell if a quadratic is the difference of two squares is first by telling if you're taking the difference between two terms, which we are because we're subtracting, and then you have to think about if each term has a nice square root. So 9 has a nice square root, and I'm actually going to write it over here. So the square root of 9x squared has a nice square root. The square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of x squared is x. And 16 has a nice square root. The square root of 16 is 4. So we are taking the difference of two squares. And the way we're going to factor the difference of two squares is by putting both of their square roots in each set of parentheses, and then placing a plus between one of them and a minus between the other. So we're going to start by putting the square root of 9x squared as the first term in each set of parentheses, putting the square root of 16 as the second term in each set of parentheses. We're going to put a plus between one of the pairs and a minus between the other two pairs. And we're going to set this equal to 0. And now we're going to solve like we've been solving. So we're going to take each binomial and set it equal to 0. And I don't need these parentheses here anymore. So we're going to say 3x plus 4 is equal to 0, and 3x minus 4 is equal to 0. On the left, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. We get 3x is equal to negative 4. And we're going to divide both sides by 3 to get the x by itself. So we get one solution, as x is equal to negative 4/3. On the right side, we are going to add 4 to both sides of our equation. So we get 3x is equal to 4, and then divide both sides by 3 to get a second solution of x is equal to positive 4/3. So we get that x can equal negative 4/3, or x can equal positive 4/3. Let's go through two more examples just to make sure we've got this down. So for these last two examples, I encourage you guys to pause the video and try them on your own, and then you can watch me work through them to make sure that you solve them correctly. So taking a look at example 5, we have 75x squared minus 48 is equal to 0. And you may be thinking that we have the difference of two squares, But we don't quite have the difference of two squares right now because 75 does not have a nice square root, and neither does positive 48. So what we want to do is see if we can factor out any common factor between 75x squared and negative 48. And if you think about it, we can pull out a 3. So we're going to take a 3 out. 75x squared divided by 3 is going to leave us with 25x squared. And negative 48 divided by 3 is going to leave us with negative 16. So we have 3 times the quantity of 25x squared minus 16 is equal to 0. And now let's just divide both sides by 3 to get rid of it. On the left, the 3's cancel out, so we're left with 25x squared minus 16. And on the right, 0 divided by 3 is 0. And now you may notice that we do have the difference of two squares. 25x squared has a nice square root, and so does 16. So we're going to factor this in a similar way that we factored number 4. So we're going to take the square root of the first term, so the square root of 25x squared is 5x. We're going to put that in the first spot of each of our parentheses. We're going to take the square root of the second term, so the square root of 16, and we get 4. We're going to put that in the second spot of both of our parentheses. We're going to put a plus in one of the parentheses and a minus in the other. And now we're going to solve this by setting each binomial equal to 0 when solving. So we're going to say 5x plus 4 equals 0 and 5x minus 4 equals 0. Solving the left equation, we can subtract 4 from both sides, so we get 5x is equal to negative 4. And we can divide both sides by 5 to get a solution of x is equal to negative 4/5. Solving our right equation, we're going to start by adding 4 to both sides. So we get 5x is equal to positive 4. And finally, divide both sides of our equation by 5 to get our other solution as x equals positive 4/5. So we get x is equal to negative 4/5 or x is equal to positive 4/5. And finally, taking a look at our last example, we have 2x squared plus 6x minus 80 is equal to 0. So we can factor out a 2, so that's what I'm going to start by doing. I'm going to take a 2 out. If I take a 2 out of 2x squared, I'm left with x squared. If I take a 2 out of 6x, I'm left with 3x. If I take a 2 out of negative 80, I am left with negative 40. And this is equal to 0. I'm going to divide both sides by 2 to get rid of it on the outside. On the left side, the 2's cancel out. They go to 1. So I'm left with x squared plus 3x minus 40. On the right side, 0 divided by 2 is 0. And now I want to factor this by thinking of two numbers that multiply to negative 40, that add to positive 3. And if you think about that, we should get positive 8 and negative 5. So we can write our two binomials as x plus 8 times x minus 5. And this is equal to 0. And now we're going to set each binomial equal to 0 and solve. So x minus 5 is equal to 0. Solving the left equation, we can subtract 8 from both sides to get a solution of x equals negative 8. Solving the right equation, we can add 5 to both sides to get a solution of x is equal to positive 5. So we get x is equal to negative 8 and x is equal to positive 5. So hopefully this video helped you guys understand how to solve quadratic equations by factoring. If you want more practice with problems like this, check out the link in our description for a free practice worksheet.